Thanks, Jort. You're much taller than I am, so I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Okay, so here we are. Also, to reiterate what Jort said, the live chat is open, so I'm really happy to answer any questions if you have them. And what I want to do today is try to read very slowly. It's quite emotional material for me, so I want to, well, take it slow, and I scripted this very much because, well, you know, you need a roadmap sometimes. Yesterday, March 16th, 2021, marks 2 years since the death of artist Barbara Hammer. My work and presence here today is indebted to her. And this presentation in particular is especially dedicated to Florrie Burke, Carmel Curtis, those close to Barbara and those moved by her work. This is also very much for the artist students of Rietveld, this particular context of which I'm speaking. So as another vantage point for you to consider your work in your life. What I would like to share with you today is multifold in characteristics and genres. On the one hand, this presentation is partly a celebration of Barbara's life through how she died. On the other, it's the way Barbara lives on in me after her death. It's also a partial mapping of the social landscape of grief in the unfolding of her death. It's a vignette into processes of taking care of one's artworks and legacy in the face of death and dying, as well as the anecdotal experience of being proximate to it, in the haphazard ways of intermingling personal and professional life. This is also curatorial in nature, in gathering, organizing, and making this artistic and cultural assemblage available in this public way. And I think this presentation might be also doing things that I'm not aware of yet. And I think I'll only know later and from your witnessing and interaction. To that end, truthfully, this is a demonstration of my grief in order to more adequately move through it. Grief works like that, not exactly neat, clean, or linear. You see, after the opening of the retrospective that Carmel and I co-curated with Barbara, working closely with her, titled Barbara Hammer, Evidentiary Bodies at Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York, which opened in October 2017. I moved to the Netherlands and joined the team of Costco Art Institute. I went back to New York briefly in January 2018 for the launch of the exhibition catalog that Carmel and I edited. For the book launch, there was a screening of Barbara's work, Evidentiary Bodies, with a live cello performance. We didn't include this work in the exhibition, Carmel and I, that we curated, but with our choice in the exhibition title, we wanted to point to its existence, a kind of curatorial wink that I think in retrospect didn't hold as much weight as we intended. The day after, at Florrie's place with Carmel, Florrie and Barbara's dog, Dandy, I remember we ordered food to be delivered, and Barbara mused me a way a queer elder does about queer relationship forms. Carmel and I signed her copy of the exhibition catalog. We opened fortune cookies. Mine said, "Ignore previous cookie." I lent her the book, The Art of Death, Writing the Final Story by Edward Dandicat, and slipped the fortune cookie message inside. That was the last time I hugged Barbara. Now I've launched right in, and if you don't know Barbara's work, you might be wondering, who is this Barbara and what's her work like? Well, I will first point you to her website as a starting place, which has undergone this great redesign and content lift since her passing and is an incredible source to begin with. You can also find her autobiography, Hammer, Making Movies Out of Sex and Life, which explores her life and philosophies on art. But for now, what's important that you know is that Barbara Hammer is a pioneer of experimental queer cinema, most known for being one of the first to give visibility to lesbian sexuality and life in the artistic and poetic forms of film. But not only a prominent lesbian filmmaker, she made an abundant amount of work throughout her life as an artist, from moving image works to performances and installations, photographs, collages, drawings. She made works that touch on so many different themes and subjects, often exploring larger events and historical narratives by way of her relation to them, whether through family and kin, shared experiences, shared artistic affinities with lesbian artists, writers, and filmmakers, and so on. And often with people and topics that are underlooked or unnoticed. Barbara was also so excited to collaborate across generations and sensibilities. She was a willing mentee, eager to learn from others, and undoubtedly a mentor. She really moved between the two. She mentored many of us. I've inherited from Barbara, and clearly generations of feminism, that making work is a way for us to process our lives and what is happening around us, to do so explicitly and unapologetically. I am a descendant of Barbara, and while this was extended to me by Barbara initially reaching out, I claim this through the relationship that we fostered. You know, I came from the US South, a sort of southern bumpkin, attending graduate school in New York, and nowhere near the relational art scene of New York City until I was planted within it and, you know, through proximity. So I'm indebted to artist A.K. Burns, who I see as being part of the generation between Barbara and I, because A.K. initially recommended Barbara to contact me about being the additional curator for her show planned at Leslie Lohman Museum of Art. That was in September 2015, and together with Carmel, the three of us worked together on her exhibition for 2 years before it opened in October 2017. This exhibition would be the first retrospective of a lesbian artist that the museum would mount, surprisingly. But unsurprisingly, it would be Barbara's exhibition. It was also the first exhibition for which we could share a glimpse into how much additional material Barbara made beyond her film work, a glimpse into an important aspect of lesbian art, her story. As you can imagine, this was a daunting and intimidating task. Carmel and I, two young curators, deep diving into the collection of such a prolific artist like Barbara. And not only her films, which are 100 plenty, but her archive, her works on paper, her installations, her performance documentation, which you are seeing here now, as most of these here were digitized from film slides during the preparations for our show. Now that I reflect on it, there are a number of ways in which we could have curated this show differently. There are a number of exhibitions we could curate of Barbara's work now and into the future. We are only really scratching the surface. But exhibitions are like that, a composite of a particular unfolding of an artist's work in the particular conditions and relations of that time and place. It's about timing. This instance, together with Carmel and closely with Barbara, was marked by a sense of urgency in time and in an abundance of material to work with, all while contending with the reality of Barbara's illness and debility, as if the hourglass just kept pouring and pouring sand. We had studio visits and meetings shortened by fatigue, occasional scare visits to the hospital, navigating brain fog from chemotherapy and pain medication. Working with her during this period changed my relationship to time and planning, as well as a deep understanding about the interdependence of our lives. The possibility of her death before the opening of her exhibition loomed heavy over our preparations, and I often thought about it, unavoidably as one does working closely with an artist who was living dyingly. Challenges in planning with the institution became surreal. Sometimes Barbara would speak in terms of possibly not seeing the show come together, a sort of foreboding that became part of the plan. So I was leaning into our circadian correspondence. Barbara helped me prepare for her inevitable death, like she did with many others. But as much as I became used to the idea, I still didn't know what it means to be ready. Honestly, I am still swimming in the complexities of grief around her death. But what is incredibly lucid for me is the energetic and loving extent to which Barbara planned for her legacy and the care of her life's work once she is no longer with us. I've learned from Barbara and others, and through my death doula training and hospice volunteer work, that there are actually a tremendous amount of ways in which we can be prepared for our death and prepare others for it too. I witnessed part of the acquisition process of her paper archive, which is now held in the library at Yale, the digitization of her films and works, setting into motion their forms of collection and distribution, the countless interviews, photo shoots, and other forms of documentation, establishing the Lesbian Experimental Film Award with queer art, and so on. And there's really so much more. And there's so much more that I just don't have the time and space here to share all of it. But it's not to be underestimated the amount of organization and administration that this takes, which could and usually does scare some people off when thinking about their own end-of-life planning. But caring for it means caring for your life in the way that it touches others. To no surprise, Barbara was also incredibly vocal about this process. She let everyone know and kept everyone in the loop, inviting others into end-of-life planning to make it more of a social experience in queer community. She knew how significant all of this work was, just as she asserted herself and body in her works and over decades into male-dominated art spaces, into conversations she felt were important. She also knew that this work was evidence of her life. She knew it mattered. We know that it matters. In the process, she reminds us that we matter too. When it came time for her exhibition at the Wexner to open, the Wexner Center for Art, Barbara Hammer in this body, which I think is beautifully curated, she was already sure that she wouldn't be there for the opening, the kind of certainty. Yet she was in good hands and truly entrusted those around her to take care of her work and present it to her desires. In these years leading up to her death, Barbara generously transferred her life's work and wishes to Flory, her partner of 30 years. When Flory and I spoke recently, she shared how the multi-channel and layered video installation of evidentiary bodies in the show at the Wexner have been realized for the first time exactly according to Barbara's intention of the work. That's a really big deal. Flory said when she entered the installation for the first time, she was completely moved to tears, whispering, "Barbara, you did it." And now, as Flory manages the Barbara Hammer estate, she is sure that evidentiary bodies can only be installed and presented in this full form, no longer simply a screening of the work. You know, when making advance directives or living wills for your life, you assign and ask consent for someone to be the executor, to take care of having your wishes fulfilled. But damn, Flory, Barbara and Flory. Flory. Flory has been a human rights advocate in her professional and personal life, and to see the ways in which she has become so knowledgeable about not only Barbara's work, but the ways of the art world with the help of advisors is truly moving. Not only where would we be without Barbara, but where would we be without Flory? Like I said before, the launch of the exhibition catalog in January 2018 that Carmel and I edited was the last time I hugged Barbara. But this moment is also the before and after mark for me, in a way, like the kind of line in the sand. Time continued to stretch for Barbara and others, yet that last year of Barbara's life featured a feverish production and some exciting collaborations during that time of increased and impending reality. I think that this was also the moment where she was showing up at everyone's openings. She was so hyper visible. And there are particular happenings in this last year that I want to share that really touched me, that I was able to experience from afar. One is the visible and expressive support and life celebrant that is Company, Barbara's gallery in New York City. Prior to this, and notably, Company exhibited Toronto, an exhibition of Barbara's photographs from the 70s, around the same time that the show at Leslie Lohman opened. And then earlier than that, and a vital connection in this mix, was the exhibition Lesbian Whale, early paintings and drawings curated by Andrew Durbin, which helped inform the works we showed at Leslie Lohman. And then there's the performative lecture, The Art of Dying, or Palliative Art Making in an Age of Anxiety, at Whitney Museum of American Art that took place in October 2018. It was a profound demonstration of her energy and her experience and her influence. Nicole Eisenman referred to this performance as a new genre, the reverse funeral. A line from this lecture from Barbara is, quote, "I hope that what is important to you stands out most clearly as it has for me. When life is measured in months instead of years, I hope you will make work from the place of needing to create without paying heed to the sugar-coated traps of success promised by the art world." So if you haven't seen this yet, I really hope that you will check out this video that's on YouTube, especially for the students of Rietveld. And then there was also Barbara Forever, an epistolary project between Barbara and Avery Ocean Hughes, a queer artist like AK that I see as part of the generation between Barbara and I. It was edited by Corinne Fitzpatrick, who I believe is working on a book that centers around Barbara's death as I speak. Barbara Forever is tender and inquisitive. It's archival, and you can also see the candidness between Avery and Barbara. So please check this out too. Avery researches into queer death, and like myself, is practicing death doula work. In Barbara Forever, you can see Barbara's language and memory deteriorate in those final months, which she is conscious of and vulnerable about in her openness and navigation of it. It made me think about how at the end of her presentation at the Whitney, she made a shout out to Carmel, and then right after to an unnamed person in Belgium, which, because it's the country next door to the Netherlands, I know it was meant for me. Avery's work inspired me to look into my own correspondence with Barbara, as I imagine it did for many. We could create such a project, I think, cataloging the amazing things that Barbara has said. I checked back into mine, and the last thing Barbara said to me was, "Wish you were closer, but you look so happy where you are." In those final months when Barbara was in palliative hospice at home, Flory arranged daily visits with Barbara for so many people from the community. Flory mentioned how even as Barbara struggled physically to speak and move, she asked each visitor to really get close to her, to speak with and to her with such intensity about their life, their feelings, what she means to them. It makes me think about the idea Barbara casually mentioned at some point, as sort of an idea for an artwork, to turn a gallery into a hospice for her and set up a bed so people could come and visit. Flory told me that in those final days, she asked to go outside one last time to feel the sun on her face. And Flory got to see that big, ear-to-ear Barbara smile. Her illness was traversing many years she couldn't fully plan, but she was ready. She has informed my and others' current I'm really emotional right now. She has informed my and others' current gravitation to death work and my understanding of what it means to live and work with illness and to plan for death. You know, if you live like you are dying, so to speak, communication and social relations can become a careful, conscious transmission of your life. For as much as Barbara could plan, there was still not the possibility to truly plan her death. She wanted to. She wasn't fearful of dying, but she did fear suffering. Suffering is really the stuff of the living, just as dying is. Death is another one of those pillars of life that is often kept private, especially in the West or global North. And Barbara's curious and energetic personality was intent on making it public. Not only her illness and sort of deterioration from it, which we have witnessed in many artworks, and also especially in the last century, but really the actual process of dying and its eventfulness. You don't have to be this wild, loving, and vibrating spirit like Barbara to be confronting your own death anxiety. But doing so can allow you to taper the sufferings of your own making and actively address the systemic oppressions which affect quality of life in the first place. And you don't have to be overly sentimental like me, but knowing how your life can affect others can mean teasing apart care as not something that's paternal, but something that looks like planning and attention and making space, organization, responsibility, forgiveness, transformation. In those final months, she advocated for the legalization of medical aid in dying in New York, to be able to have the kind of dignified and peaceful death she wanted. And this is still not legal, but this year the legislation is actually up for consideration again, and currently it's only legal in 9 states in the US. So Barbara wasn't able to choose exactly, but in her liveliness and in her pain, she could at least choose to bring us closer to her in the process, to bear witness to it. When I asked Flory if there was any message she would like to share, that I could transmit for her on this occasion, she sent me this. Quote, "I think each of us should have a choice about how we live and about how we die. Barbara was curious about the dying process and did not want to be so drugged with morphine that she couldn't engage. She wanted to live until she couldn't. It's a balancing act in palliative care, enough drugs to zone out or suffering. This is why medical aid in dying is the answer, to stop the suffering, end quote. Lastly, the phrase living dyingly comes from The Art of Death, writing the final story that I mentioned earlier. After Barbara read it, she mailed it back to me here in the Netherlands in autumn 2018, before her lecture at the Whitney. And she said she wasn't entirely impressed by it. She found it to be too broad and not specific enough. This book is one of the last objects that I have that was touched by her, actually. So I brought it here with the fortune cookie message that was used as a bookmark. I wanted to title this presentation today, Dying Livingly, instead of Living Dyingly, because she brought communal life to her dying process. And I think there is so much we can learn from this. So, thank you. I think this is a nice image to